Today, we're taking our 3D renders to the next level by creating endless photorealistic nature assets from free stock footage using photogrammetry. First, we will go through the basic workflow that will allow you to mass-produce assets with a short turnaround. Then we will explore optional steps that will make those assets look even better and be more optimized. We'll cover easy clean retopology in Blender, baking the high-resolution geometry into a normal map, creating roughness maps, removing the baked shadows from the original footage within Blender with 5 different methods, and finally sort our meshes into the asset browser for easy reuse in any project. Okay, enough talking, let's get down to business. First, let me show you how the basic workflow goes. Well, first off, we need to find high-quality footage of things to turn into 3D. Let's head off to our favorite copyright-free stock footage website and search for drone shots of cliffs. We're looking for shots where the drone moves sufficiently around or over the main object. We need to be covering enough angles because parallax is what makes photogrammetry possible. Try to avoid choosing footage with harsh lighting because it makes the shadow removal parts more difficult. You should also avoid moving objects in front of your main subject, like humans or cars, which will make the reconstruction more difficult. And avoid at all costs reflective surfaces that change in brightness or color depending on the camera angle, like water or snow. We will settle for this footage. To follow along, you can find the link in the description of the video. This one will work well because we have enough movement in the shot. The horses here will not be a huge issue because they don't move much, and they occupy such a small fraction of the frame. After making sure that the footage is not copyrighted, let's hit download. For the photogrammetry itself, we're going to use the free software Meshroom. Link for download is in the description. I know it looks like a scary software, but trust me, it's very easy to understand. The first thing we're going to do is save our project. Now let's drag our downloaded video into the images window. Just click OK. Importing the video has added a node on the left side of the pipeline that's called keyframe selection. This node allows us to automatically extract images from the video. If you select it and scroll down in the attributes, you'll find some parameters we can change. We're going to set the minimum frame step to 10, which is the number of frames that Meshroom will skip before keeping one, and the max number of frames to 30, because frankly we aren't going to need a lot of frames for this reconstruction. We're also going to uncheck both use sparse distance selection and use sharpness selection that look very similar to previous ones or that are too blurry, but you know, this node is a bit experimental and I find that it usually ends up just skipping every frames of the video. Now, to automatically add the extracted frames back into the pipeline, let's choose View, Live Reconstruction, and copy and paste the output folder path from the node into the image folder of the live reconstruction. Now we can just right-click on the keyframe selection node and choose Compute. You can check the log tab to see what is going on in real time. When Meshroom is done with the node, which you will know when the progress bar turns green, click Start in the live reconstruction window and our images will be automatically added back into the images window and ready to use for the next steps. Meshroom should automatically start the main pipeline, as you can see with the green and orange progress bars, and it should run it until the structure for motion node. By the way, at this point we can stop the live reconstruction and close its window. Judging by how it looks and by how the cameras are orientated, we can tell that the mesh is actually upside down. To fix that, we're going to make some space after the structure for motion node and right-click to add a SFM transform node. Plug in the SFM data to its input, remove the current link by right-clicking on it, and then connect the new output to the SFM data on the next node back into the pipeline. With the new node selected, click on Attributes and change the transfer method to manual. Now double-click on the node to send it to the preview window, and we can use the gizmo to rotate our mesh correctly and scale it or move it if we need. The camera control is a bit awkward, so remember that you can always right-click and reset the view if you need. When we're satisfied, we can right-click Compute on the Prepare Dense Scene node to work our way to it. Now we're going to shortcut a good part of the end pipeline. The depth map parts will generate high-quality geometry from the images, but we can actually save a lot of time by generating it directly from the point cloud. So let's all click on the meshing node to duplicate them, right-click on the links connected to those nodes to delete them, and let's plug the SFM transform file output to the meshing input and the Prepare Dense Scene image folder output to the texturing image folder input. Let's double-click on the meshing node and check Custom Bounding Box in the attributes. This will spawn a box that represents what we want to keep on the mesh. For quick cleaning up, we can hide the gizmo of the SFM transform to clean up the window, and we can now adapt our box to keep most of our mesh. In the mesh filtering node, let's check Keep Only the Largest Mesh to get rid of all the small unattached vertices. And finally, in the texturing node, let's change the file format to JPEG and change the downscale factor to 4. This will produce an 8K divided by 4, so 2K texture file. And let's just hit Compute to finish everything off. We can preview our final mesh by double-clicking on the texturing node. And the result is not too bad. At this point, we have completed the basic photogrammetry workflow. To import it into Blender, let's go to File, Import, OBJ, and navigate to the folder where we saved our Meshroom project. Our final mesh is located in the texturing folder. From now on in this video, each additional step is completely optional but will make our mesh look better and be more optimized. First, we may decide that what we need is a low poly asset, but with the fine geometry detail baked into a normal map. To do that, we first need to create a better quality mesh with Meshroom. The easy way to do that is to run the default pipeline that includes the depth map and depth map filter nodes, which produces meshes of higher definition at the cost of longer process times. In our case, let's just use the node outputs from the depth map filter node into our new mesh nodes to avoid recreating our bounding box and changing our texture options again. Creating a low poly version inside Blender is super simple. With our new high poly mesh imported, let's create a plane, give it a shrink wrap modifier, and use the eyedropper to select our high poly model as a target. Then turn on the snap option and set it to face. While moving our vertices, they will now always stick to the surface of our high poly model. Now we'll just extrude the faces around until we've roughly covered our mesh. The key is to start with wide shapes and then slowly subdivide where we need to add detail. Let's remain attentive to the areas with a lot of rocks and boulders. These will require the most subdivisions to keep the nice detail. Also, we prioritize quads and avoid making triangles, which might make the shrink wrap look bad in the denser areas. And now we can smooth out the mesh where needed. Let's add a few seams and make a smart UV project to unwrap our mesh. Now let's see how to reproject our texture map onto the new low poly version. In the material of the high poly mesh, let's connect the texture map to an emission shader and plug that into the material output. Now let's create a new material for the low poly model and make a new texture image inside. In the render tab, let's switch to cycles, select GPU rendering, lower our samples to just 1, select the direct light preset to quickly set our diffuse bounces to 0, and open the bake tab. Let's switch the bake type to emit, check selective to active, and increase slightly the extrusion setting. Now let's select the high poly mesh, and while holding Ctrl, select the low poly model. This will make the first one selected and the second one active. Now make sure your destination texture inside the low poly material is selected, and simply hit bake. Looking good! Let's quickly save this texture on our drive. Now the black holes are here because the high poly version from Meshroom had some holes in the first place, so there was nothing to project. But solving this is very easy. Let's jump into texture paint mode, select the stamp tool, and by holding shift and right clicking we can set the source area for a stamp tool. Now all we need to do is paint over the holes to cover them. And we're done with the low poly model. What we can do now is create a normal map to add back the fine detail that was lost in the low poly geometry, as well as a roughness map. Let's create a new texture inside of the low poly material, call it normal map, and in the high poly model, let's forget about the emission shader and plug the BSDF back in. Now let's select our two meshes correctly by selecting the source first and then control clicking on the target and change the bake type to normal. Hit bake and you should obtain a beautiful normal map. Let's not forget to save our map on our disk and set its color space back to non-color. What we can also do is create a second version of our normal map using Photoshop with another method and blend them together to make it more rock-like and detailed where we want. Let's load our albedo texture and go to filters and apply the normal map effect. Play around with the settings to get finer bump detail from the texture itself. Okay, back in our material, let's load our second normal map, mix them together with a mix node, and let's create a third texture image to use as the factor input for that mix node. This third texture will basically be a mask to paint where we want to replace the initial normal map with our new version. So now, in texture paint mode, after making sure that we're working on our mask layer, we use a white brush to paint in our new normal map. I'm mainly focusing on the rocky cliffs and boulders, which are lacking definition and sharpness from the initial normal map. Now, to combine everything back into a single unique normal map, let's create a new texture. Select it, and in the bake menu, uncheck selected to active, because we're baking within one single object now, and hit bake. And here we have our normal maps set up baked down to a single file, which we should not forget to save on our disk. The roughness map is a lot more straightforward. In Photoshop, I'm adding a black and white adjustment layer and a curves adjustment. So the wider the map is, the rougher it will appear. But instead of guessing which exact white values we should aim for, let's simply check out some mouse textures on textures.com and sample the values on the roughness map preview. We see that the color has a hex value close to E8088, so we should aim for a value close to that. So let's pick that specific color and paint it on our new layer to get a reference. And now we'll edit our curves adjustments until we roughly match the good value. And that's it. And here's our asset with our newly created normal map and roughness map. Now, obviously, because we used our real-life outdoor footage for our photogrammetry, the model has some baked shadows in the albedo map. So our next additional step will be to delight our model to make it more versatile across different lighting scenarios. The general idea is to create a mask that targets only the shadows on the texture and brighten those regions with some curves or screen blend mode. Let me show you 5 easy ways to do that in Blender. The first method is to use the ambient occlusion. It's a pass that darkens the creases of a mesh based on geometry. But what if we use that pass as a mask to brighten up the creases of our model? Well, first we need to bake an actual ambient occlusion map. So let's plug an AO node into an emission shader, turn the samples down to something like 2 or 3, create a new texture map, and with it selected, change the bake type to emit and hit bake. Now let's invert the newly created texture, run it through a color ramp to fine-tune the areas to work on, and mix it with the albedo on add mode to make these areas brighter. The difference is subtle, but we're already getting rid of most of the very darkest areas. The next method is to simulate the light from the original footage, trying to match the shadows, and then remove it from the texture map. So let's create a sun lamp and orient it so that we align our 3D shadows with the real baked shadows. It might be easier to do with the original video open to side. Once we're satisfied in the material, let's plug a default white BSDF shader, and in the world shader properties, let's drop the background strength to 0. Now all we're left with is our virtual shadows on our mesh. Let's create a new texture, call it something like Shadow Mask, and change the bake type to Combined. Combined is basically the sum of all the other passes. Emit wouldn't work because it will discard the sun lamp and therefore the shadows. Let's hit Bake, then plug our new texture in a color ramp to invert its values and fine-tune them. And we're going to use that as a mask for a curves node. As we make that curves adjustment brighter, only the parts in white from the shadow mask will be affected. Also a quick tip, shadows tend to be slightly cooler than lit surfaces, so increasing slightly the red channel will help us here. When we're satisfied, we can then bake this into one single albedo texture, making sure to turn the bake type back to emit. And this is looking pretty decent. There are still some shadowy areas remaining, but you can see that as we plug our own HDRI and light setup, we can already get some pretty convincing results. The third method to remove shadows is by far the simplest, but it's also the most tedious. It consists in literally hand painting a mask with a brush over all your shadows. Frankly, it is the most reliable method, but also the slowest, and not really the most exciting, so let's move on to method number 4. The fourth method is using the screen blend mode. The way it works is you define a specific color that will act as a filter based on its brightness, and only colors darker than your filter color on the base layer will get brighter. So the setup is simple. You plug your texture into a mix node, change it to screen, and change the brightness value of the feed color to choose which parts of the image to brighten. Basically, you need to play around with the values until you find the brightness of the shadows on the texture. You can even add a mask on the node, so you can be more precise with the regions to target. Finally, here's one last method to remove shadows within Blender, and it's my favorite. Let's have a look at this specific mesh. All the surfaces that are facing downwards are in the shadows due to the sun's orientation in the original video. So what if we could automatically target all the pixels that exist on a surface pointing downwards? The easiest way to achieve this is to use the geometry node and break apart the normal vector into X, Y, and Z. If you have enabled the Node Wrangler add-on in the preferences, by holding Ctrl-Shift and clicking on the node, you can preview what each axis represents in terms of pixels on your mesh. In our case, we want to target the Y axis. Let's fine-tune the selection range with a color ramp, and now we can use that mask to work on the shadowy areas alone. We can brighten them up using the method of our choice, and I'm going to use another screen node to do that. And look at the before and after. Drastic difference. Now that we got rid of our shadows in our texture maps, the next step we can take is to organize our newly created assets in the Blender Asset Browser. This is a new feature that comes with Blender 3.0, so make sure you have an up-to-date version. This will allow us to easily sort them into categories and reuse them in any other project by simply drag and dropping them into our scenes. Let's start by gathering all of our Cliffs assets and placing them into one single blend file. Now let's clean up the unused data, pack everything into the blend file, and save it in some folder that will become your asset library. Now let's select our objects, right-click, and choose Mark as Asset. All we need to do now is to tell Blender where to find the content for the asset browser. So let's open up the preferences, navigate to File Path, and add the folder that contains our asset library, which is where we saved our blend file. And all we gotta do now is to open up the asset browser in a new window, and everything is in here. And in any other project you work on, you can then simply drag and drop your clip from your asset browser. It's super simple. I suggest you manually change the thumbnails with little renders you make yourself, because as of now, the default icons are a bit underwhelming. Well, what are the next steps? steps? Well, hopefully you now have a good understanding of the photogrammetry workflow, and you should be able to explore, experiment, and adapt this method to your own needs. Here are a few avenues for reflection and ideas for you to experiment. First, you can explore Meshroom a bit more and get familiar with the parameters on the different nodes. If you need a higher resolution mesh, I suggest you use higher resolution images and more of them, but also to play with the describer quality and density in the feature extraction node, max input points in the meshing node, and reduce the texture downscale in the texturing node to generate larger resolution texture files. Or maybe you want the process to be a lot quicker, and then the single parameter that will reduce the process time the most is, by far, the resolution of your images. And you can get away with pretty low-res images. I've had some very decent scans made with pictures only 800 pixels wide. Resolution is a bit overrated, especially when you combine a lot of images in the end to generate your textures. And to make the process even leaner and completely forget about retopology inside Blender, you can actually do that inside of Meshroom. It's certainly not as clean, and if your mesh has holes in the first place, it will not fix them like we did in Blender, but it can be a time saver. All you need to do is plug a mesh decimate node into the pipeline between the mesh filtering and the texturing nodes, and set the max vertices settings to something that fits your needs. You can also completely switch to paid options like Metashape or Reality Capture. These options usually generate meshes a lot quicker than Meshroom and with superior quality. But more importantly, what I like you guys to take from this video is that you should continue experimenting with working with your meshes and maps in Blender to get more familiar with all the different techniques we saw. Practice makes perfect. Try to bake a displacement map from the geometry, for example. But in the meanwhile, I'm making this blend file available for free just for you guys. You can grab it in Gumroad, the link is in the description. It contains all the meshes you're seeing there, not necessarily all retopologized, but at least with all the basic texture maps. As soon as you download it, you can include it into your asset browser to get started with environment building. I hope this guide was useful. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on the next videos, and drop a like if you found the video helpful. Until next time, my friends, stay safe, keep creating, peace.